Revenge of the Robber Barons Part 2, Control Mechanisms. September 9, 2019 by Anna von Reitz. Yesterday, we discussed how J.D. Rockefeller's understanding of pipelines and how they control markets and delivery systems of all kinds, was applied in a predatory way to take over functions of government and also, then, to enslave the markets on either end of each pipeline. We observed that any system that transports someone or something from point A to point B, can be considered a pipeline, as in, a pipeline for drugs, a pipeline for commercial banking transactions, or, as it happens, a pipeline for governmental services. Obviously, then, transportation is a key element to the whole scheme of privatizing government and reducing it to a pipeline operation, and so is blocking transportation. In order to establish a nice profitable little monopoly, it is necessary to be able to keep others out of the pipeline market that you control. That's what got J.D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil into trouble in the first place: monopoly business practices. So it isn't just about controlling and operating a pipeline, it's about keeping other service providers from operating their own pipelines in competition with yours. It's about controlling the flow of commerce, not only via conduits, but via the deliberate construction of dams and levees and shunts, diversionary structures to manipulate the direction of flow. In order to pull all this off and attain the kind of control they wanted, the schemers first had to transport you off of the land and soil of your State of the Union, steal your actual identity, and redefine you as a thing. And this had to be done in at least 2 of the 3 jurisdictions of the law, because as the saying goes, it takes 2 to tango and 2 ends to every pipeline. So which 2 jurisdictions of the law did these con artists corrupt? We have the proof that they corrupted the jurisdiction of the sea, British control, which is represented by territorial governments worldwide, and the jurisdiction of the air, Pope's control, which is represented by municipal governments worldwide. The jurisdiction of the air was corrupted first, both in terms of timeline and moral depravity. And this is where Kurt Kallenbach's work plays such a pivotal role of discovery. If you stop and think about your own genesis as a living being, you will recognize that you came into being when a certain unique egg was fertilized by a certain unique sperm. This moment of fertilization is when your own unique DNA first coupled together to form a zygote, and ultimately, you. So in actual fact, you came into being approximately 9 months prior to your exit from the womb, an event marked down as a birthday. A few days or weeks later, the bean counters take things a step farther and register you as donated public property, which generates a registration date also known as a birth date. Neither the birthday nor the birth date have anything to do with you, the natural man or woman. The day of your actual genesis, and your point of origin, is the fertilization date, and your fertilization day is forever unknown and can only be approximated. The birthday doesn't represent your true origin, instead, the birthday marks your appearance on the land or at sea. The birth date marks the registration of your name as a public property owned and operated by the schemers. So the first artificial separation, severance, that the plotters set up as a means to denigrate you and redefine you as a mere thing, is the birthday assignment and the given name. The second thing that they do to artificially transport you into their corrupt jurisdiction is to mistake the fact that you are born on the land. To do this, they redefined hospitals and courts as vessels belonging to the British territorial government, howbeit, dry-docked on the land of one of the American states. And they subjected you to their foreign municipal law and the foreign international law of the sea, by misidentifying you as a U.S. citizen, not an American. So their first pipeline is designed to, 1. Sever the divine contract between man and creator by not recognizing the fertilization date as your true point of origin, and therefore not recognizing you as a natural living man. 2. Substituting the birthday as your point of origin and a trade name for your God-given identity. 3. Redefining you as someone born at sea instead of on the land. 4. Mistaking you as a U.S. territorial citizen, as if you were born in Puerto Rico. 5. Deliberately misidentifying you as a ward of the state of state, a pauper and public property in their commonwealth system. 6. Subjecting you to territorial statutory law and law of the sea, all of which amounts to, 1. Kidnapping you from your natural jurisdiction on the land, and 2. Transporting you into the foreign international jurisdiction of the sea so as to, 3. Subject you to foreign law, and 4. Seize upon your lawful person and assets via unlawful conversion of both. This whole turkey trot fraud serves to convert your lawful person on the land to a legal person on the sea and to convert your assets from private ownership to public ownership, conveniently subject to their administration. Once you are misidentified as a British territorial citizen and as a ward of their state operation, they can move you to municipal jurisdiction and basically rent you and your assets to the Pope as a Commonwealth property. To be blunt and explicit, they make you into a public trust, with the filthy British territorial government retaining the beneficial interest and the equally filthy municipal government retaining the legal title. Read that the Queen gets the first cut of the cream off this criminal exercise, and the Pope gets all the service contracts and administrative control functions to pad his larder. The Pope's municipal government then seizes upon your given name, and sells you as a commodity. They do this by spinning off various kinds of corporations named after you, a Cestui Que Vie State Trust named in the form, John Allen Doe, a public transmitting utility named John A. Doe, a public charitable trust named John Doe, and so on, only using your given name as the basis for all this chicanery. So from one basic identity theft, more forms of identity theft are spawned. You are not only misidentified in the jurisdiction of the sea as a British territorial citizen and as a ward of one of their failed state operations, you are mischaracterized in the jurisdiction of the air as mere corporate entities, which are similarly wards of their failed state operations, permanently severed from your divine nature as a living man or woman. The only jurisdiction of the law that remains pure and operable is the jurisdiction of the land, and you have been kidnapped from the jurisdiction of the land to promote all these profitable and highly criminal abuses of God's children. Which brings us back to the pipelines. As you can see, they diverted the natural pipeline from God to land jurisdiction. You were created as a unique being by an act of God, not a birthday. You are meant to live on the land, not the sea. You were delivered safely to the land jurisdiction of your State of the Union, but British agents operating in breach of trust deliberately misidentified you as a British territorial citizen, as if you had been born in Puerto Rico. They severed your time link and provenance as a divine creation when they bypassed and ignored your actual point of origin and substituted a birthday for it. That's the first shunt. That denied your identity as a living man owed all the protections of the actual law, and brought you under the state statutory law instead. They then transported you off the land jurisdiction by a false assumption of territorial citizenship. That's the second shunt. That unlawfully converted you to a foreign political status and removed the guarantees and protections of the constitutional agreements. And then they sold the territorial citizen, already converted into a thing and not recognizable as a man or woman, into slavery to the Pope's municipal government. That's the third shunt. Now the pipeline operators have you and everyone else right where they want you, misidentified as a thing, owed no protection or respect, subject to a foreign legal and monetary system that they run, and rendered utterly dependent on a pipeline system they control as a monopoly. Is this evil? Yes. Is this criminal? Yes. Is there anything we can do about it? Yes. We can expose them and their self-interested lies for what they are. We can expose their system and root it out like an invasive weed, root, stem, and leaf. The current iteration of this system in America started immediately after the Second World War, basically with the signing of the peace treaty with Japan in September of 1945. We were kept in this fictional, wartime status in order to implement the infamous Marshall Plan to rebuild the rest of the world. We were worked as slaves and leveraged and taxed, and our production was subjected to punishing tariffs in order to pay for it. Once the rest of the world was rebuilt, the slave masters kept us toiling by using the Cold War as their excuse for continuing the wartime emergency status, continuing to collect the so-called victory tax from Americans, etc., etc., etc. And all this leads us back to a discussion about God, and which God we are serving. A number of things happened immediately before and after the Second World War that reconstructed the pipelines. Before the war we have the Nationality Act of 1940, codified as Title 31 U.S.C. 1321-1322, which affected average Americans in breach of trust. We also have the infamous Buck Act in 1940, which consigned actual U.S. citizens and citizens of the United States to literal enslavement. Then, immediately after the Second World War, we have in quick succession, 1. The Lanham Act of 1946, which was supposed to protect our private property interests, but wasn't enforced in that capacity. 2. The Supreme Court case of Everson v. Board of Education, which gave teeth to separation of church and state, that is, separation between their nation operated as a theocracy and our country. 3. The National Security Act, which created the National Security Council and identified that unconstitutional, unauthorized, and unelected body as the de facto government responsible for these outrages. 4. Public Law 107-293, see also Place 97-280, which very clearly confirms that the national motto is, "In God We Trust." Well, folks, if you have been following along, you now know that there is a difference between John Adams and John Adams. And I have in my hand a brand new US silver dollar, upon which are emblazoned the words, "In God We Trust." The God they are referring to when they say, "In God We Trust," refers to a foreign god, Baphomet. Just as they have attempted to sever our sacred contract with our Creator by substituting a birthday for our point of origin, they have substituted Baphomet, the father of all lies, for our land jurisdiction God, the Creator. Similarly, they have converted not only the God being invoked, but also the trust being invoked. As our students now know, "In God We Trust" is Dog Latin, unintelligible either as English or as Ancient Latin. What this really tells us is that in their view, God is a corporation, and so is the trust that these pipeline operators are pushing. All these venal self-interested lies and false legal presumptions have been used to redirect the flow of people, goods, and commodities out of the pockets and control of the actual people, and into the hands of the pipeline owners and operators, out of private ownership into public ownership, where our assets can be administered by clerks and judges operating private in-house corporate tribunals that are also owned and operated by the same criminals. Both the fake corporate courts and the private security, law enforcement officers are used to implement and enforce these crimes upon the people of this country and throughout the world at the behest of the National Security Council, an unelected, unconstitutional, unofficial, unauthorized committee, which operates to defend the Baphomet-worshipping municipal government and studiously neglects to say which nation and which national security they represent. When you tear the lid off the patents these cretins have protected under the guise of being national security interests, you very rapidly learn that none of this is being done in the interests of living people. It is all being done to secure corporate advantages over living people, and to make corporations into gods. J.D. Rockefeller would be proud, the living God, not so much. Those responsible have been given the sign of Jonah and the prophecy of Jeremiah, which is as true today as the day it was first uttered. They can have chapter 31 or chapter 51 of the book of Jeremiah, but one or the other, depending on their own choices, is going to come down on their heads, as sure as I am sitting here writing this.